One of the crazy ideas I hear constantly promoted on social media and YouTube is the necessity of disassembling the airbrush just to clean it after each use. I'm here to tell you that it is not only an unnecessary waste of time, but can actually cause wear and tear on your airbrush. Here's my 40-year-old airbrush that I've used every day for every painting I've created in my career. It may surprise you to know that this airbrush has not been disassembled since 2023. I haven't even removed the needle in over a year, and yet it sprays perfectly, with no clogs. Now, I should qualify this statement because I'm using the illustration line by Createx, which is an airbrush paint, but it can apply to other types of paint as long as there is no hardener in the mix. Let's look at the color. Now, I put color in here, which is notoriously hard to get out, which is red. There it is. Notoriously difficult to clean out of your airbrush because it wants to reside in it. So here's what I do. To clean this airbrush completely, I go through 3 stages. 1, I fill the cup with water 3 times and spray it out. So I'll fill it up like that, and I'll go spray it out. That's 1. Fill it up again. That's 2. Fill it up again. Halfway through the last spray out, I'll back flush the airbrush by pinching the nozzle with my fingers while pressing down on the air trigger, forcing the air back through the paint shell into the cup like this. You can see the bubbles going on. Some people call it back bubbling, but actually it's called back flushing. This agitates and loosens any stubborn pockets of paint hanging out inside the airbrush. Now, what I'm getting out now is just pretty much dirty water, but you still got that red component in it, which is exceedingly hard and difficult, especially if you're trying to switch to white. Next, I'll fill the cup with Windex or any glass cleaner with ammonia, but I don't spray it. No, you don't want to atomize ammonia. Why not? Because everything you atomize, you breathe, and you don't want to breathe in that stuff. I'll fill it all the way up there. There we go. Let's add a little more. Now, instead, the way to get this paint to be pushed through the airbrush, I'll push the paint through the airbrush by creating hydraulic pressure in a full cup. I'll allow the ammonia to sit in the airbrush for a few minutes, allowing the further dissolution of the contaminants before pushing a little more through at a time. You can see how the ammonia passes through the airbrush without atomizing. Now, ammonia doesn't work for paint types that are not dissolvable with ammonia, such as solvent-based paint or Createx Wicked. For them, you'll need to use a solvent or Restore by Createx. I'll also back flush it a little bit, like that. Pull the trigger back, no air. Push down on it like this, and you see I'm starting to get a little more contaminant coming out of it, but not so much red anymore. Okay? Now I'll simply add some white to the airbrush and run some of it through, but pausing every now and then to allow the white paint to dissolve the remaining contaminants inside the airbrush. The longer it sits, the better. Okay, just pour in a few drops. Just a few drops. Okay, I'll back flush that a little bit too, just to see what happens. And you can see I got a little bit of red still in it. You can see a little bit of contamination, just barely though, just barely in there. But essentially it's spraying white. I'll give it a few minutes though, because if I wait, what's going to happen is that white paint will dissolve the red or whatever contaminants in there, because white is also a good cleaner for airbrushes. Okay? A little more expensive than regular cleaner, but it's kind of the good last step toward cleaning your airbrush thoroughly. I'll let the airbrush rest for a couple of minutes. Let's try it again and see what we're getting out of here. I'm spraying white on white. Now, if I can't see any pink coming out of it, obviously the airbrush is clean. You can see pink right here. A little bit of contamination there, but you notice now when I'm spraying, let's go ahead and flood it really good. I've got a fairly pure white right there. Of course, the more white you run through the airbrush, the cleaner it's going to be. Now, that's pretty white right there. I don't see any contamination in the airbrush, and this airbrush is good to go. If I'm switching to another color, I really don't need this last step with white. If I want to store this airbrush for an extended period, say several months, I can simply fill it with water, like that. Spray a little water through the airbrush, and park it wet. As long as the water remains in the paint passage, the airbrush will never dry out and clog. The side cup has an advantage in that the paint passage is long and very narrow, inhibiting and minimalizing any air exchange which might threaten to dry out the residual paint inside the airbrush. Now, parking the airbrush wet has the same principle as a bottle of open paint. A bottle of open paint will not dry out very quickly. It takes a long time. Why is that? Well, mainly because the open bottle of paint has a small hole right here and there's very little air exchange going on. There's obviously air in this paint bottle, but there's not a lot of exchange of air. And that's really important here. Same principle here. There's not a lot of exchange of air going on because this paint passage, this tube, is so small, it doesn't really let air move in and out easily. So if there's any residual paint inside that airbrush, it's not going to dry out. Now it's a different story when it comes to a top-mounted cup because there's a large opening there allowing a lot more air exchange in this situation, which would dry out the paint pretty quickly inside this airbrush. So to remedy that, all you need to do is fill that up with water, take a lid, lay the lid on there, and you can park this airbrush for a very, very long time. You don't need to clean it up after you use it. Just run a little water through it, and if there is paint living inside the body of that airbrush, it won't dry out because you've pushed all the air out of it, and there's no air exchange because you put a lid on it, and that'll keep your airbrush safe for a long time.